Okay, so the Constitutional Convention. Let's talk about how that came about. People who supported a stronger central government, they were called nationalists. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton were among the prominent nationalists. Okay, Hamilton suggested that a convention of states be set up to revise these Articles of Confederations. All states, except Rhode Island, sent delegates to the Constitutional Convention held in Philadelphia in 1787. So, most of the 55 delegates to the Constitutional Convention, they had experience in government. George Washington was the presiding officer, which gave it a lot of credentials, a lot of cred for it. James Madison, he kept the records of the debates. And Roger Sherman, he also attended as well. The meetings were closed to the public. So, sorry about that. James Madison, he was the first to devise a plan called the Virginia Plan. And this plan proposed throwing out the Articles of Confederation and creating a new national government with the power to make laws binding upon the states and to raise its own money through taxes. It also called for a national government made up of three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. The legislature should be divided into two houses. Voters in each state would elect members of the first house, and members of the second house would be elected by the first house. The Virginia Plan benefited states with large populations because in both houses the number of representatives for each state would reflect the population of the state. Now, the counter plan was the New Jersey Plan. This plan only revised the Articles of Confederation to make the central government stronger. Congress would have a single house in which each state would be equally represented. Congress would have the power to raise taxes and regulate trade. Congress voted to proceed with the Virginia Plan with the purpose of working on a new constitution for the United States. A union built on compromise. So the delegates of the Constitutional Convention were divided geographically speaking. All right. The small states wanted changes that would protect them against the big states. Northern and southern states, they were divided over the issue of slavery in the new Constitution. So, the convention appointed a special committee to resolve differences between the large and small states. The committee worked out the Great Compromise. It proposed that in the House of Representatives, the states would be represented according to the size of their populations. The Senate would have equal representation. Okay, the voters in each state would elect the House of Representatives. The state legislatures would choose the senators. They also passed the 3/5 Compromise, which came up with a plan for counting enslaved people in a state. Every 5 enslaved people in a state would count as 3 free persons for determining both representation and taxes. Southern delegates insisted that the new Constitution forbid interference with the slave trade and limit Congress's power to regulate trade. Northern delegates wanted a government with control over foreign imports into the United States, so a compromise over these issues said that the new Congress could not tax exports. They also agreed that it could not ban the slave trade until 1808 or impose high taxes on the import of enslaved persons. Okay, so they still want a framework of limited government. So the Constitution was based on the principle of popular sovereignty, or rule by the people. The Constitution created a system of government called federalism. Divided the government between the federal or national government and the state governments. The Constitution provided for the separation of powers among the 3 branches of government. The legislative branch makes the laws. It is made up of 2 houses of Congress. The executive branch enforces the laws. It's headed by the president. And then the judicial branch would interpret federal laws. It is made up of a system of federal courts. The Constitution also provides for a system of checks and balances to prevent any one of these 3 branches of government from becoming too powerful. The powers of the president include proposing legislation, appointing judges, putting down rebellions, and the ability to vote, to veto or reject legislation. The powers of the legislative branch include the ability to override the veto with a 2/3 vote in both houses. The Senate approves or rejects presidential appointments of that kind of stuff. Okay, so Congress can impeach or formally accuse of misconduct and then remove the president or any high official in the executive or judicial branch if convicted during a trial. The judicial branch of government would hear all cases arising under federal laws and the Constitution. The Constitution has a system for making amendments or changing the Constitution. It is a 2-step process. of proposal and ratification. Okay. New amendments can be proposed by a vote of 2/3 of the members of both houses of Congress, or 2/3 of the states could call a constitutional convention to propose new amendments. A proposed amendment must be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures or by conventions in 3/4 of the states. All right, so people who wanted this new Constitution, they were called Federalists. Supporters of the Federalists and the new Constitution included large landowners, merchants, artisans, large coastal cities, and many of the farmers who lived near the coast or along the rivers that led to the coast. Their opponents were called the Anti-Federalists. Many opponents believed the new Constitution included a Bill of Rights. Many opposed the Constitution because they thought it endangered the independence of the United States. Independence of the states. Anti-Federalists included some prominent American leaders and Western farmers living far from the coast. Factors that worked against the Anti-Federalists included their negative campaign. They had nothing to offer in place of the Constitution, and the Federalists were better organized and had the support of most newspapers. In a collection of 85 essays written by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay in the Federalists, is summarized the Federalist arguments for ratification. So, state ratifying conventions took place in 1787 and 1788. Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Georgia and Connecticut quickly ratified the Constitution. In order to get the Constitution ratified in Massachusetts, Federalists promised to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution once it was ratified, and to support an amendment that would reserve for the states all powers not specifically granted to the federal government. New Hampshire became the 9th state to ratify the Constitution, but many feared that without the support of Virginia and New York, the new federal government would not succeed. You only needed 9 states to ratify it, to make it official. So Virginia ended up ratifying the Constitution when the Federalists agreed to add a Bill of Rights. New York agreed to ratify the Constitution once it learned that Virginia and New Hampshire had also ratified it. New York did not want to operate independently of all the surrounding states. So, by July of 1788, all states except Rhode Island and North Carolina had ratified the Constitution, and this was enough to establish the new government. By 1790, both North Carolina and Rhode Island had also ratified the Constitution, and we'll talk later about the Bill of Rights. Okay, probably more in class. All right, and that concludes the second video here. There won't be a third one. I accidentally included 2 and 3 together. So, anyway, look for a short quiz over this information, and we'll talk about it more in class. Thank you.